On this episode of China Uncensored, China's growing interest in green energy. Hi, welcome to China Uncensored. I'm your host, Chris Chappell. Bad news, everyone.
Our world is in peril.
That's right. Air pollution, greenhouse gases, fidget spinners. The world is out of control, people. Our planet, voiced by Whoopi Goldberg, is dying. And now that President Donald Trump has withdrawn the U.S. from the Paris Climate Agreement, who can the world turn to for help? One moment. Much better. Moving on. It's true that many are now looking to China to be a global leader when it comes to climate change. Even some U.S. politicians plan to team up with China, like California Governor Jerry Brown, who recently met with Chinese officials and green energy companies in Beijing.
California is all in, 100% in meeting the Paris agreements, in fact, going beyond. And we only do that if we can work with China, Chinese provinces, to get the job done.
Yes, the Chinese government has pledged to combat pollution. China's Premier Li Keqiang has even promised the return of blue skies. Li also pledged that upon the blue skies' return, that he would ask it to please tell us why it had to hide away for so long. So long. Where did we go wrong? I didn't realize Premier Li was such a big ELO fan. But love is like oxygen. You get too much, you get too high. Not enough, then you're probably living in Beijing. So does this mean China is poised to become a world leader in combating climate change? Well, it turns out being a world leader in combating climate change is easier said than done, especially when parts of your country look like a permanent Instagram filter. I think this one's called Terracotta Warrior. Even though some Western media and elected officials might be saying China should replace the US on climate change, that doesn't mean the Chinese regime is too keen on that. According to my favorite Chinese state-run media, taking on global leadership is too much too soon for China. Here's an example. A recent inspection in one region of China showed that a shocking 70% of companies there were violating pollution regulations. It's a bit of a hiccup, or a gasping, sputtering cough, as it were. Over the course of several months, the Chinese Ministry of Environmental Protection investigated some of China's most polluted cities in the mega-urban sprawl of Jing-Jin-ji, a combination of Hebei, Beijing, and Tianjin. Jing-Jin-ji, it rolls right off the tongue. Anyway, the ministry looked at a variety of industries and found that 14,000 out of 20,000 companies were producing more emissions than allowed or operating without pollution control equipment. But just because inspections showed there was a problem, doesn't mean the Chinese Communist Party is going to effectively stop the problem. Look, Chinese leaders would love to have less pollution. After all, it literally makes China look bad. I think this filter is called cobalt monoxide. But it's complicated. The Chinese economy is heavily dependent on manufacturing, which creates tons of pollution. And the party isn't willing to sacrifice China's economy to save the planet. The promise of economic prosperity is the main thing keeping the Communist Party in power right now. But pollution is also a potential threat to the party's power. Pollution is one of the very few issues the Chinese mainstream middle class will protest, en masse, like this one in Jiangsu back in 2012. And in Dalian, after tens of thousands of white-collar workers protested in 2011, they successfully forced a chemical plant to relocate. Anti-pollution protests are one of the only kinds of protests that can have an effect in China. And that's because these protests are generally directed at local companies or local government officials and not at Party Central, at least for the time being. You see, the Chinese Communist Party has set up a system where the central government solves pollution problems by issuing guidelines and targets, and then leaves it up to local officials to implement the guidelines and reach the targets. On one hand, this enables the party to blame local officials when things go wrong. But on the other hand, this system is not necessarily effective when dealing with pollution, because local officials don't always come up with pollution solutions that are not stupid. Like how, to keep skies blue, local officials in Beijing banned outdoor barbecuing repeatedly. And in Xi'an, officials just stuffed cotton gauze into the air monitoring equipment. Hey, the numbers don't lie, except they really, really do. And in this lovely city in China's Hebei province, villagers protested against a chemical plant they alleged was giving them cancer. So officials had a great solution.
They blocked the doors to our village houses to stop us going out and blocking the road. Some would take you away, some would beat you, some hit you so badly you'd end up in the hospital.
As you can see, Chinese officials really beat the problem. What's that, Shelley? Okay, too soon. But China is changing, you say. They're investing billions of dollars in renewable energy. That's true, but there are still many state-owned enterprises in the power, steel, and cement sectors that rely on coal, and they have tremendous power to block limits on coal emissions that could hurt their bottom line. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, China burns almost as much coal as the rest of the world combined. This was Beijing at the end of last year. I think they're calling this Instagram filter "Orange is the New Blue." But according to the Paris Agreement that China just signed, all that's gonna change. Just kidding. It allows China to actually increase emissions until 2030. But don't worry, that's when the Chinese regime promises CO2 emissions will peak. I totally swear, I'm gonna quit smoking. Just give me like 12 more years. To be fair, over the past 2 years, China has stopped the construction of 103 new coal power plants. And over the past several years, coal consumption has already been decreasing, but according to this article, that's largely because of slowing economic growth. And while the Chinese regime canceled construction of a bunch of coal plants, there are 46 coal-to-chemical plants in operation and another 22 under construction. But there's still plenty of time for China to actually meet its targets from the Paris Agreement, as long as local officials have a steady supply of cotton gauze. On top of that, China is also helping other countries pollute through its One Belt, One Road project. Basically, China is helping developing nations build coal-fired power plants. According to National Geographic, a state-owned Chinese company is currently building a $2 billion coal power plant in Kenya. And in Africa overall, more than 100 new coal plants are in development, and about half are being funded by China. This is not to say Chinese officials don't care about pollution. Many of them genuinely do. It's just that this kind of green always comes first. So what do you think of China's ability to fight pollution? Leave your comments below. Thanks for watching this episode of China Uncensored. Once again, I'm your host, Chris Chappell. See you next time.